Hi, welcome to another one of Innovation Visual's Digital Marketing Answered podcasts. I'm really happy to be joined by Helen Murray, who is Client Services Manager here at Innovation Visual.
Nice to be joining you, Tim, on this discussion about cutting through the noise of Gen AI.
Indeed, indeed. Well, it's a very popular subject, and whilst it is a vast subject about generative AI, I think the whole thing about noise and cutting through that is something that that people listening and watching this podcast are going to be interested in. But before we kick off with that, do you want to just give people a very brief outline of the whole Gen AI position at the moment?
Yeah, so if you don't know already, I mean, it's hard to ignore. Gen AI is AI tools that can create or generate new content. So whether that be written content, audio, video, images, all these different sorts of content. And it really has boomed in, let's say the last 6 to 12 months, Tim.
Yeah,
Would you
I would. It's. I would say it's the classic hockey stick curve of it's been around for a while, but the steepness of the adoption curve keeps getting quicker and quicker. So now's a good time to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's only set to increase, I think, over the next, 5 to 10 years, and I think I was looking at some figures before. I think the global Gen AI marketplace is currently worth, I think, 136 billion,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
just yeah, just crazy.
yeah. It's bonkers numbers. I'm surprised you're even looking 5 years in advance because I think the Terminators will be here by then.
Not
Um,
very
but yeah, I mean, for the here and now, I think that as marketeers, one of our issues is how the fact that Gen AI is going to deliver content in a much different, should we say, streamlined way, is the problem. Do you want to give people a sense of how Gen AI is creating content faster? What kind of speed differentials we're talking about here?
I think within minutes, well, like minutes rather than hours. So it's easy to create, a blog, written content, videos within like 15, 30 minutes rather than what could have previously taken, a couple of hours.
Yeah,
So all that stuff around, we're gaining efficiencies, but gaining efficiencies leads to a much wider, scale of content being produced, which is not always good content though.
yeah,
It's the quality of the content that is being produced by AI, which is the concern, and it's how do you cut through the mass-produced content and really stand out in this very, very now
yeah,
crowded marketplace.
yeah. And I think there was an interesting talk I was listening to at Web Summit about one of the things that people aren't really considering when they're talking about the excitement of using Gen AI is that the amount of attention out in a market is
Mm,
finite. So, if you've got 1 million people you're addressing in your market and you're wanting to talk to them, you're wanting to get their attention, if you create double the amount of content, there's double the amount of content in the market, you're getting half of the proportion of the
mm.
attention that you were getting before.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's a good point as well, actually, because if you think about how the modern consumer consumes content these days on, YouTube, you've got the likes of TikTok, Instagram, people have much shorter attention spans. Like people only engage and you've only got a couple of seconds to really grab that attention. So yeah, even it becomes even more shrinked in terms of trying to, yeah, grasp people's attention spans. So standing out is even more challenging, would you say?
I would definitely say that. So I think this is the fundamental part of this discussion in terms of
Mm,
the noise is the fact that it's not even half the time to create the content
mm,
now. It's probably a third, 10%. It's a smaller amount to create it. There was somebody was talking about a video that was created on Gen AI platforms, and it did take, I think, a day and a half to create it. But the
mm,
example they were saying was actually if you'd have created this using techniques even just a year or 18 months ago, it would have been a 20,000-30,000 pound project to create that. Yet now it's taking, you know, a couple of days to do. So the what's happening is people have still got the same production budgets to create written content, visual content, videos, that kind of thing. They're not saying, oh, well, actually, I'll just use 15% of that budget and create the same amount of content that I was creating before. They're going, oh, right, well, let's just create more and more and more. And that's then flooding the spaces with content, isn't it?
Yeah, no, 100%. And would you say it's, you know, impacting all companies in the same way in terms of, you know, content being flooded both for B2B and B2C from your perspective, Tim?
I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of B2B companies don't think it's impacting them as much as it is. The
Mm,
B2C ones are, you know, they're already typically jumping over it and getting involved and understand that this is happening because they've seen the snowball effect
mm,
for many years with social media, because the different social media platforms have driven large amounts of content in the consumer space. And I
mm,
think the flip side is B2B's kind of been a bit complacent about how much content's going in there. But I do think it's happening, and both spaces are equally as impacted. And if you think, probably people spend less time consuming B2B content, if you like. I'm sure you don't sit at home on an evening, Helen, you know, going through LinkedIn looking for interesting
right.
things to spend Innovation Visuals money on, kind of thing, do you?
Not always, sometimes. But it's that whole passive consumer thing, you know, sometimes I'll just flick on and I'll see something interesting that grabs my attention, which really ties into what we're talking about. But interesting what you say there as well in terms of from a B2B perspective, you know, the decision making process in B2B is so much longer. So you almost do need more content to engage at different points in the journey. And the fact that maybe we're not utilizing content in the right way, from a B2B perspective versus B2C, I think
Yeah,
that's a really, really, yeah, valid point. And yeah, it's thinking about how we can be a bit more creative anyway in terms of marketing to a B2B audience.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've defined the problem.
Mm,
Um, so the marketing leaders listening to this, they're thinking, okay, well, you've defined it. How are you going to solve it? So, in
mm.
terms of the basics, you know, where do they start in terms of cutting through the noise?
Okay, so it starts with strategy. You need to have a really, really strong content strategy and thinking about, okay, what content am I going to be creating? You know, who's your target audience? What sort of content do you need to engage with them? What formats are going to be working best? So you really need to start at the point of having a clear strategy. It can't just be, okay, I'm going to go to Gen AI and just create this random piece of content, because then you're going for quantity over quality. It does need to be thought through.
Okay. Okay, so the starting point is really solid strategy, which hopefully people have got anyway. But you're
Mm.
saying that the danger with Gen AI is people start looking at quantity over quality.
Yeah, yeah. And someone needs to lead that strategy. You know, you could have big marketing teams in your department and one person goes off and it's like, oh, I can just go and create this quickly, and another person, and then you don't have a joined up, you know, a joined up strategy as well. So someone really needs to take ownership of being that, you know, this is the strategy, this is the plan, and this is how we're going to engage with ultimately your target audience.
Okay. And what sort of strategies do you think, um, you know, you've seen working, cutting through the noise? What are the sort of things that are effective at this point?
Okay, so there's a few things here. So I think it's really important to stand out, in terms of creating content that can't be replicated. So videos, for example, is a lot harder to replicate than written content.
Yeah.
Um, Things like, you know, can you draw on unique pieces of research or get your own data? Because again, that can't be replicated. It's unique, it's trustworthy. So really thinking about how you can incorporate, unique content, your own data, things that can't be replicated into the content strategy. I think that really works well. And then expert opinions and thought leadership. So have a look at who you've got in your business. Think about, is there an expert that can talk and provide their opinion on, the latest in the trends in your marketplace. So
Yeah.
really thinking about how you can utilize people in your business and also partnerships
So
potentially.
that's really interesting. So one of the things about Gen AI that people forget about is that it's just recycling what it can
Mm,
already learn, because it is Gen AI. AI is machine learning. It's programs that learn from vast amounts of data. And what you're saying in terms of an approach is you've got to really look towards stuff that can't be replicated easily. So that might be the medium can't be replicated quite as easily.
mm,
So things like video. So we're having we're doing a one-to-one video here for the podcast. That's very difficult for Gen AI to replicate.
mm,
Now it could have, you could use Synthesia and you could just throw a blog post at Synthesia and it'd be read out, but
mm.
it's not very engaging and it's actually not necessarily as good a content. And then also the fact that we're thinking about stuff and we're thinking the answers, we have opinions, we have
Mm.
industry knowledge. What you're saying is this kind of stuff is the things that people should be focusing on, because it's not just regurgitating what's already known out there.
Yep, exactly. And I think because AI does offer you, gains in terms of like manual tasks and gaining efficiency there, you can have the time to step back and really think about how you can be more creative, think about, what ideas do you have in terms of, creating unique content. So I think, yeah, as marketing leaders, we need to be spending our time thinking about that rather than, yeah, just churning out content and, yeah, thinking about how we can use AI cleverly.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds really good. One of the things I think in terms of content strategy, the
Mm,
strategic sort of thinking about it, is actually um, companies moving to a more granular persona-based approach, because they can create more content with the same time and budget, going more persona, more stage-based. Whereas, mid-sized companies have previously struggled, haven't they, to be able to
mm.
create enough content around each of their target personas.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, really, really mapping out, what content have you got for each of your target audiences? Because if we're focusing, using B2B as the example, decision-making unit can be 3, 4, 5, even 10 people. And it's really thinking about who is involved in that decision and thinking what content have you got to target each of those personas at different stages of their journey. And I think that's sometimes, yeah, like you say, where the gap sometimes can be in terms of from a content strategy point of view.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
And I think also the way those personas are going to consume content,
mm,
my sense is, and I have to say I don't have the data to back it up other than what we see our clients succeeding with,
mm,
is that uh, the more persona based they can go, we've always seen that that's been more effective. But I think the flip side in this cutting through the noise of Gen AI is, if you receive content that is more tailored towards you, you're actually more likely to engage with it than a more generic piece of content that's talking about something in a broader sense. Would you
yeah,
agree?
yeah. No, I agree, and I think that's where I think one of the key points as well is thinking about how you can collect first party data from your personas, because then if you have got that really persona driven content, you can build your list, you can then segment your data and really send them the tailored content that they're actually interested in. So also thinking about
Can
email as a really valuable channel as well.
can you just expand for the people listening on that bit about uh, growing your first party data? What do you actually mean about that?
So it's collecting data that you you own. So whether that's through people filling out the forms on the website or giving you their details explicitly, and then you can, add them to your CRM, and then you can send them personalized content after that once you've got their details. And over time, you can start progressively getting more details from them as well by continually engaging with them, sending content that's actually relevant to them and that they're actually interested in. So that's what I'm referring to
Right.
there.
So that's like, although it was the talk I gave in Vilnius was about e-commerce, but that
Mm,
talk I gave about making more profit from your data, and I went into a lot of detail about not just using first-party data,
mm,
but how to gather better first-party data. That's what you're saying. So we should probably put a link to that that talk into the
yeah.
description of this video.
Yes. I mean, that's a whole subject in itself
Yes.
in terms of how you can collect first party data because there's so many different methods you can use from CTAs, chat flows, quizzes, competitions. It's a
Yeah.
whole other conversation. So we'll
Yeah.
definitely add the link into
Yeah.
the description for that there.
Yeah, and also how to structure that so that you're creating a data set that's usable when it comes to what you were saying, which is now the personalization aspect, which
Yeah.
is identifying the different personas, personalizing to those personas based on those data points, and then delivering more specific content to them to then cut through the noise. So Helen, you know my opinion on some of this
Mm.
stuff, but I see some pitfalls in the use of using Gen AI to create content. Do you want to expand upon those a little bit?
Yeah. So I agree that there's definitely pitfalls that we should all be aware of when creating Gen AI content. So we're talking about the data and reliability of what the artificial intelligence is trained upon. And, we've discussed previously internally that, some of these AI tools won't explicitly say, you know, what data they're being trained on and what their sources are and how reliable and up to date their sources are. So I know
Yeah,
ChatGPT, for an example, did release updates in September 2003 to access current data from the internet, but it's still not clear about are they actually using the most
mm,
up to date and reliable data. So there's that involved in it.
yeah.
Things like hallucinations is a big issue, so providing responses that are not authentic or just
They're
completely
not. They're just
made
simply
up as
made
well.
up. Yeah, I mean this is the thing, isn't it? I mean the hallucinations. Some people don't really think this through, but I know of there was a professor of computer science at a UK university and asked one of these models for 5 maths books for university undergraduates, and it gave 5 maths books with very plausible titles and authors, and they were all 5 were completely made up. So I
Mm,
think people need to understand that a large language model is about writing text and it being logical and seemingly coherent, putting the next word after the word before kind of thing. It's not a search engine. It's not a taking a factual database and then rebuilding it necessarily. And I know there are evolutions, should we say, of the Gen AI tools, and
mm,
there's some brilliant guided AI where the AI is effectively co-piloted with really good guardrails to help that. And we work with a Gen AI company that does exactly that in a very specialist area, which gets over a lot of these issues. But I think people are typically using these very generic models, aren't they?
yeah, yeah, and that's a really interesting point you make in terms of like the prompts, because prompt engineering is difficult, and if you don't get the prompt right, the output is going to also be poor. So you really need to spend time and thinking what is the prompt going to be to get the best outcome. But
Yeah,
that's still a learning for many of us to write the
yeah.
best prompts to produce what you need it to. So that's definitely a consideration when creating Gen A
Yeah,
content.
yeah. And one of my other concerns, and again, something which came up at Web Summit in November of 23, was the copyright issues. Now, they're kind of
Mm,
multi-leveled when it comes to Gen AI, um, but in terms of there are some issues about copyright, the
mm,
source that it's been learnt from. So there was an example of asking the image generating Gen AI to create, and the example I was told about was what the Simpsons would look like if they were humans. And
Mm,
I think there's about 4 artists, human artists, that have created imagery around this theme of what the Simpsons would look like if they were human. And the problem that I was told about was the models have only got these 4 sets of images to work from. And so they're effectively cloning artists' work and
mm,
producing work that is effectively very, very close to something which is copyrighted and belongs to an artist. So
mm,
there's a whole issue there. And then
yeah,
at the other side, regardless of where, well, maybe not regardless, but taking aside that issue, if you create an image using a generative AI tool, if you're an agency or you're a company, do you actually own the copyright? Can you
mm,
assign the copyright to a client if you're an agency, or if you're a company, can you use that? Because if you don't know the provenance of how the generative AI has got to the point of creating that imagery,
mm,
take for example the Simpsons image. If you were to create an image like that using Gen AI and then just use it on your website,
mm,
are you actually infringing on somebody else's copyright? And if you are, where does the liability lie?
mm,
Does it lie with the tool? Does it lie with you as the person? So
mm,
there was a branding agency that was giving a talk that I was listening to, and they were saying that whilst they used Gen AI to get towards
mm,
producing outputs for their clients, they never you like the outputs that the client receives would never be generated by AI,
mm.
because their lawyers are saying you can't be sure that you can do that.
Yeah, 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 definitely. It's a bit of a grey area, and I think, yeah, it's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of from a user's perspective that we need to really, really carefully consider. Mm,
But we've seen it before with with people getting served with legal documentation where back in the day somebody's gone and scraped an image off the internet and gone, oh,
mm,
I'll use that on a blog or I'll use that on a social media post, and then the company has ended up getting a cease and desist letter and an
mm,
invoice for an amount of money for using that imagery.
yeah,
You know, I've seen that with companies that don't take the care and attention that we would do on that. Back to the sort of question in hand, which is how to cut through the noise. I know that you've got quite a few ideas in that area and things that you work with clients. So can you just expand on a few other things that you would do
mm.
or suggest?
So I think trying to touch on areas that Google and the user wants. So Google's released a lot of updates in the last 12 months all around EE80. So that's experience, expertise, authority, and trust. So Google and consumers like to look for signals that relate to that to deem whether
Yep,
the content is good quality. So I think trying to think about how you can, create content that targets those different pillars
yep,
is really, really valuable. So if we just take experience as one of them, so thinking about how can you draw first-hand experience and show that you're trusted in an area, so whether that be through, case studies, real life case studies, both on video again, because that can't be replicated, and
yep.
written studies, having testimonials, from your ideal customer profile, whether you can have personal stories, so, I bought this product because my backstory is this, and this is really going to elicit a emotional response, for example.
So
And then the other,
you're saying rather than creating kind of more generic, the how to, the this is what you do kind of content, what you're saying is the more the content is personal, trusted, specific,
yeah,
the more it will get visibility because the search engines are going to trust it, but
yeah,
also then it could get engagement with the audience.
yeah, exactly. And what you just said, the how-to articles still totally have their place, and that forms part of the whole wider content strategy. But I think more emphasis needs to be put on how can you get those other, experienced and trusted content out there, like I said, case studies,
Yeah.
personal stories, and things that will elicit a bit of a emotional response and really engage with the audience as well. So I think really thinking
Yeah.
about how you can really target that
Yeah.
area of your content strategy.
One of the things, actually, it's interesting you talk about engagement. One of the things that I'm really keen on, and like us as a team to talk about, and I think doesn't get talked about enough, is the difference between engagement and actually action,
Mm,
or should we say motivation. So
yeah,
you can have a very engaging piece of content, and this is particularly true of things like social media, where
mm,
people will talk about, oh yeah, we had loads of likes and shares, but actually how much did it elicit action in the
mm,
recipient? Because we're marketeers, we're about moving people from their current state to a state which is
mm,
closer to buying the product or service that we want. And I think too often, particularly with this ability to create lots of content quickly,
mm,
people are chasing engagement metrics potentially at the loss of, should we say, action metrics, and metrics
mm.
which see people actually change their behaviors.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Because I think the problem, especially with engagement, you can get a lot of engagement from people who may not be relevant,
yeah,
who are gonna be purchasing, your service or product. So you can get a lot of engagement, but you also need the intent as well
yeah,
to purchase. You need to be engaging with the right people, and it comes back to the personas. Are you creating content, again, that will engage with the personas and having that persona-driven content
absolutely.
strategy? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Are there other things that we should be thinking about for cutting through the noise? What about user-generated content you've mentioned before?
Yeah. So user-generated content definitely, again, has its place. So I think we're moving from the whole, mass influencing period to more focusing on, like, partnerships and micro influencing, and also getting that generated content, because again, it's content that can't be easily replicated, but
Yeah,
is also gonna engage and be really on the money in terms of engaging with your target audience. So I think, you know, user-generated content is only gonna increase in terms of its relevance
okay,
and importance, and from both a B2B and a B2C
yeah,
perspective as well. It's thinking about,
okay,
how can we,
okay,
get that from a B2B perspective.
yeah. Well, and I suppose the user-generated content is good, but we've also got to think about, I think particularly on cutting through the noise, you need to think about production value, production
Mm,
quality. You can have something which is engaging from a user generated perspective, which isn't necessarily high production value. But I think the flip side is, if you're going to do, things like video, corporate
mm,
video, and things like that, you do need to make sure that it doesn't look thrown together with AI kind of thing,
yeah,
and you need to have a production value which is
yeah.
significant.
Yeah. But I think the beauty of sometimes user generated content is the authenticity, and if it's not completely corporate and, you know, commercial, I think that's also fine. It's having that balance,
Yeah.
like you say.
Yeah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we should really think about, I think, maybe wrapping it up.
Yeah,
Um, so, we all know Gen AI's here to stay, and that the result is not, people spending less of their budgets on content, but spending the same or more, and just creating more and more content to grab people's attention.
yeah.
So then the primary things to get your audience engaged, cut through the noise. Hit me with them, Helen. Can you remember them? I'll
So,
help you
yeah,
out if you can't.
no, that's fine. I think I can remember them. So have a cohesive, persona-driven content strategy that targets your personas at different stages of the buying journey, depending on
Yeah.
where they are.
So
I
go
think
granular as well then with your content for those
yeah.
personas.
Yeah, and
Great.
make sure that they wanna hear from you. So if they start, like, engaging, and signing up to your newsletters, or, through, collecting first party data, create that
Yeah.
content that, they really want to engage with as well.
So great.
Um,
So also, yeah, that first party data as well, that's
yeah,
really important, because you actually want to have an avenue to be able to talk to them and personalize that information. So if you
Yeah.
haven't got that, that's a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think, yeah, personalization is key. That's only going to grow in terms of importance. And again, from a perspective of cutting through the noise, I think the more you can personalize the experience and provide a better experience, I think that's only going to be a good thing from a consumer point of view.
Great. Okay. And then use some user-generated content where you can, get
Yeah,
authentic,
yeah,
and as you say, go down that trust, really think about the quality of what's being said, not just the quantity of what's being said, however you choose the mediums.
totally. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's really good. Well, hopefully, people will have found that really interesting, and I'm sure we'll get some comments back on that one, and hopefully some more input as well. And so yeah, so Helen, thank you very much for your time
Thank
today.
you.
Thanks to all of those of you that have been listening or watching, depending on what platform you're on, and depending on what platform you're on, please do like, subscribe, go for the notifications, whatever that platform specific action is, please do take it. And we look forward to hopefully having your attention on the next one with these non-AI generated videos. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
But I'm sure this is not the last time we've spoken about Gen AI. It's going to be, it's here to stay.
Indeed not. Indeed not.
So, yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, audience.